Property prices are rising, interest rates are dropping, and the rules of the game are changing. And there's one strategy that lots of property investors are using to get their foot into the market for the first time. And this can give you a serious edge. In 2025, buying your first property can feel out of reach for a lot of people across the country. Many of our cities, the prices are skyrocketing, 5, 10, 15, 20% growth in a year. And our young people and first-time buyers are looking at property prices and thinking, how am I ever going to be able to afford to buy a property? You see, the thing is, you want to grow your wealth, but you're seeing people get ahead and you're feeling a little bit left behind. And this is pretty common across a huge amount of the Australian population. We've also got tighter lending. We've also got lifestyle costs. There's a lot of shiny things out there that we can spend our money on. So if people are finding it hard to save their initial deposit, but also to be able to afford their ongoing repayments. And they're wanting to live where the lifestyle is, but also being convenient to work. And this means that prices in that area are very much out of reach for many. In this episode, I'm going to show you how you can be a rentvestor in 2025. I'm going to talk about what's changed, what still works, and also how do you actually get started in today's market when you're seeing what's going on. You're going to learn how smart investors are buying, making the right decisions, how they're financing their purchases, and how you can build a portfolio and start to get ahead without a massive deposit or without giving up your lifestyle. By the end of today's episode, you're going to have a clear roadmap for how this actually works, how you can get into the market, how you can get ahead, and how you can stop worrying about how you're going to get into the market. I'm Steve Williams, and on this podcast, we talk all things rentvesting, property, and getting ahead. So I started my property journey about 15 years ago. I was living in Melbourne, couldn't afford to buy there, so I bought a property in a location where the numbers stacked up and it made sense. And since then, I've been lucky to go on and build a portfolio from there. And today I'm the founder of W Property Advisory, where we help people get clear on their why, where, what, and buy in a location that makes sense and help them find a strategy that works, that helps them get ahead. And I've helped tons of people across the country in this situation, and I've seen how it can work firsthand. So let's dive in, and today we're going to have a really great chat. We're going to talk about why rentvesting still works in 2025, the playbook. So if you are thinking of getting into it, what do you need to do to get ahead and get started? And then finally, how to avoid making a costly mistake, because I think this is what a lot of people get caught up in, is they're worried that they're going to make a mistake, and then they get a little bit of analysis paralysis and they spin their wheels and then they end up making no decisions. And then meanwhile, the prices are going up and you miss out. So these are the three things we're going to cover today. We've got lots coming, so stick around. So firstly, I want to talk about why rentvesting still works in 2025. Now, to be clear, it's not for everyone because everyone's situation is different. But I would say that the vast majority of people who are living in a city or a location where the house prices or the apartment prices are unaffordable, if they can't afford to get into the market there, the rate at which a lot of properties are growing across the country, you're often better off getting into the market with something that's affordable in a location that's growing, so you can start to build and accumulate some equity. And then this is going to give you options in the future. Now, if you live in a location where it's a little bit more affordable, maybe you're in a regional location, and maybe you're even lucky enough to be in a growth location, well, that's even better. And you may be better off just buying in your local area and taking advantage of a lot of the first homeowner incentives that a lot of our state governments offer. But if you are in a big city and you're like, I'm never going to be able to afford here, well, sometimes it's better to get into the property market rather than like keep waiting and then saving a deposit and then that money's being eaten away with inflation, and meanwhile house prices are going up. So it can certainly work, but you need to play the game right. You need to be strategic about it, and you also need to make the right decisions. And we're going to uncover some of those thought processes you need to go to determine whether this is right for you. Now, first, I want to talk about my background and my story with rentvesting. So I was living in Melbourne and I was working in hospitality. I was working for a major hotel chain, and in Melbourne, house prices were about $1 million to buy anything in the area that I wanted to live, maybe more. And apartments were also very unaffordable. And the property market was actually fairly stagnant, so there hadn't really been much growth in a lot of pockets. So given the fact that I couldn't afford to buy there, I decided that I'd actually buy in my hometown, Canberra at the time. And Canberra was way behind. You could buy a house for $500,000 on a large block, about 750 square meters, and only about a 15-minute drive to the city. And it actually, this first one of mine, I was lucky that it had development potential, which I ended up doing a duplex development as a joint venture with my dad, actually. And he had a lot of the trade skills, and I had the financial and apparently the interior design skills to bring it all together. So we made a really good team in doing that development together. But what it meant is that I could get into the property market. And at the time, I did make a bit of a mistake because the Canberra market was a little bit flat. It did stay flat for a couple of years after that. But given I was able to buy this development site, it worked really well. And then about 5 years later, the market really started to take off, and I created a lot of equity in that property. And then that enabled me to go on and make decisions to buy my next one, which I then actually bought in Melbourne. And I'll talk about that one on another podcast. But it just meant that I could see that Melbourne was never going to be potential for me at that point in time. So if I could buy into the market in a place that made sense, well, it's better to be in the market than out of the market. I'm also about having the lifestyle that you want, right? So if you're living in inner city, in a major city, and you've got this lifestyle, you've got all your friends, you're into your sports, you love going out, you love doing all these things. And to buy a home, sometimes it feels like you need to give that up. And I know people that have actually were living in the city, friends of mine, and they decided they'd buy out in the, sticks, out in a more regional area. And it wasn't really what they actually wanted. And they actually got, I guess, they felt a bit removed, and they became disconnected, and it really wasn't good for their life and their lifestyle. It also made getting to work more challenging. And so I guess in this situation, while they thought, because a lot of Australians are told you need to buy a home and you need to live in it, in this situation, it would have really worked quite well for them to buy an investment property in a location that's making sense, but continue to pay rent in a location where they're wanting to live. And it's going to mean that their work opportunities, their networking opportunities, and also their friendships are really going to keep stable rather than having to remove yourself and then live this life that sucks, really. Now, to talk a little bit about the pros and cons. So let's talk about the pros first. I've covered a few of them already, but essentially you can get your foot in the market. You can buy where there's growth occurring. So your property is not going to be stagnant in the initial stages, and you can start to build some wealth. And also there are some tax advantages, and we're going to bring an accountant onto another episode to really unpack what those tax advantages are. And then the other one is that, it feels good to get your foot into the market and know that you're keeping up and not being left behind. It feels good. So I would say that's probably the major benefits working for Rentvesting. Now, what are the cons? When does it not work? Well, firstly, you're going to miss out on first homeowner incentives. They're not the be all and end all, and also they're quite restricting as well. A lot of the states, they've got caps on the price that you can purchase, and often you can't even buy a house at that price. So sometimes they're actually quite useless. The next con is around that comfort. Like, some people do want to live in their house, right? They want to have the ability to add renovations or make it their own. But on the flip side to that, I've actually found renting for me is better, because if you see a crack in the wall or something needing to be done, it's actually not necessarily your problem, and you're not going to have to fork out the money to do it. So for me, it works well, but for a lot of people, they want the comfort of knowing that it's their own home. And then another con as well to consider, and this is related to the financial situation. So speak to your accountant about this, but you can have capital gains tax implications. And that's why it's really important to get advice from an accountant. We can hook you up with one if you need, and really just look at whether financially which works better. And I can tell you that if you buy in a growth market and it's going to get growth in the short to medium term, well, that's really going to offset that potential cost of potential taxation or any fees that you're foregoing or any benefits from the government that you're foregoing as well. So for a lot of clients that we purchase, a lot of rentvestors that were living in Sydney, we bought in a growth market. Those properties increased in value between 60 to 140,000 in 1 to 2 years' time. Therefore, it's a big, equity uplift. They've created their wealth, and that's really offsetting the I guess, if they had have bought in their hometown, which was a bit more stagnant, then it's worth doing, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. All right, so we've covered what is the benefits of doing rentvesting in 2025 and giving you a little bit of an overview already. But now I want to unpack the playbook. How do you actually start this thing? Where do you begin? And how can you make sure that you succeed? Well, first things first, you need to have a strategy. I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but primarily what you need to do is check, do the numbers make sense? Does this strategy, if you do this or take another strategy, does this benefit you? So it's important to look at things like the taxation, the benefits that you're foregoing. But then the big one is making sure you buy in a location where it makes sense. And that is absolutely critical. And throughout this podcast, I'm going to really give you tips and tricks about how you can ensure and make the best possible decision that you are buying in a location that's going to set you up for success. Because if you buy in a stagnant place where there's nothing happening and it's going to be flat for years, well, you may as well just wait, save more money and buy it down the track. So really, really critical. Firstly, high performance locations. And if we look at the Australian house price growth, if we look at Sydney most recently, the growth has been a little bit stagnant. Some locations have actually dropped, particularly at the higher end. The lower, the more affordable suburbs, they have certainly grown a little bit. Some have also gone backwards as well, but it has been a little bit stagnant. So that's the kind of market where it may not be right buying into right now. Whereas if you look at locations like Perth, so we bought for a lot of clients in Perth from 2022 through to 2025, and the growth rates there was anything from 10 to 20% per year. So properties you could purchase at say $500,000-$600,000, they're now worth $700,000-$800,000. So those rentvestors that got their foot into the market were able to build their equity, and many of them are actually now going on extracting equity, and they're using that money how they like. Some of them are actually taking holidays, and the vast majority, who I think this is probably the wisest thing, is to take the equity out and then buy another property. And this means they can then leverage, use the bank's money to generate more equity with the long-term goal to actually purchase their own home in a place that they want to live, or create a bit of a nest egg for their retirement. Because really, guys, superannuation is not going to cut it in today's world. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about the numbers. I want to talk about what makes a property rentvestor worthy and some of the metrics you want to look at. Now, let's refer to the data. Data is a really good tool to sort of look across the broad spectrum of the Australian property market. It's also important to consider some of the outlying factors around, state economies, what's the population growth doing, what's the supply doing. But some of the local area statistics we want to look at is firstly, what's the days on market? Are properties selling quickly? And is that trend actually going down? Because that's going to actually give us the insight that the supply is actually reducing. And property prices are really a balance of supply and demand. When there's excess demand and low supply, naturally it means that prices are going to go down. So we want to look at when is the demand actually increasing and when is the supply decreasing. So the metrics, as I said, firstly, we can look at days on market, because if houses are selling quickly, there's going to be less houses for sale. We can also look at building approvals. That's going to give us an idea of how much stock is coming up in the area. We want to keep that relatively low, because any more competition being built in the area could actually impact your house price. We want to look at demand, and that's the number of people looking to buy in a particular location. And there is data sources where we can look at that data to see where's the demand increasing, because again, that's going to lead to the growth in prices. The other thing as well is we want to look at how fast properties are selling. And then we also want to make sure that our property is going to be rentable. And one of the big, the most popular data point that a lot of people look at is the vacancy rates. Vacancy rates, typically anything less than 1% means your property is going to rent out really quick. If it's more around 2%, it might take a little bit longer to find tenants. Essentially, you want to find vacancy rates as low as possible. This means that there's demand from renters. And often when there's demand from renters, it means that the prices for rent are going to go up. And then naturally investors will flock there because they're like, hey, I can get really good returns here. And that also causes prices to go up as well. And then finally, we've got rental yield. Rental yield is a measure of the income you can expect as a percentage of the value of the home. It's typically anywhere from 3 to 5%, meaning that 3 to 5% of the value of the property that is coming in each year as revenue on that property. Most properties in Australia at the moment are getting anywhere from 3 through to 5.5%. Some locations, they tend to be a bit higher risk. You can find properties that are sort of 6 to 7%, maybe even more. And there are other property strategies that have higher yields. But the real thing is you really want to chase growth, because you don't make your money in property through yield. You make it through growth in the property. And yield is just going to give you that opportunity to actually pay off your costs, but then also to have the borrowing capacity to go on and buy another one. These are just a few examples of the data points that are really critical. There's tons more data points, but these are the ones you should start looking at. And in a future episode, I'm going to unpack them in more detail and let you know how you can find that data yourself. Okay, so you know that Rentvesting is for you and you've got a bit of an idea of what the benefits are and you want to go ahead. Well, the next thing is about creating a team. And for me, like as someone that's been investing in property, it's taken me time to really build up my team. And now I've got a really great mortgage broker. I've got a fantastic accountant. I've got a great building inspector. I've got a great settlement agent. And also this depends on the state you're buying in as well, because some of those professions, they can only operate in the state that you either live or are buying in. So especially conveyancers and settlement agents. But I've got this team, so I know that everything is being taken care of. I'm getting the best advice I can. And I think one of the things that's really rising in Australia is the use of buyer's agents. And that is what I am, and that's what I do. I advise people on property and help them secure it. And for people who feel a little bit unsure about what to buy or where to buy, and they really don't want to stuff it up, that's when people come to a buyer's agent to actually get advice and help them make the right decisions. Because people, like, it is a big thing, right? You're making a big investment and you want to feel confident about it. Once you've got this team together and you've got all the advice, it's time to press go. Whether you're doing it yourself or whether you are using the help of a buyer's agency, it's a big, big step. It's very exciting and it's all about making the right decisions, because if you do that, you're going to set yourself up for success. Now, what do we want to avoid in 2025? Oh, look, I see people all the time. They come to me with these ideas or someone's told them something and I'm like, it's not a great idea. Now, I want to tell you some of the things that I really want you to avoid. These are mistakes that I've seen people make and I don't want you to make the same mistakes. The first one is overpaying in hot markets. And the human nature is we are like sheep, right? And so we like to follow the herd and we get a bit of FOMO, we get excited and we're like, let's go, go, go. And in the last 3 years, I've seen first-time investors, they've just been frustrated. They want to get into a market and they've been significantly overpaying for properties when there's so much opportunity to negotiate a better deal. Negotiation is really key. You need to understand all the factors around why they're selling, how much interest there is, what's going to get the deal across the line. You also really need to work with your agent to get that deal done, because they can help you out if you ask the right questions. So paying overs in a hot market is something you really, really want to avoid. Having said that, you don't want to, I guess, keep missing out by being cheap, because I've had and seen people where they just want to offer like $20,000 below the market value. Most sellers are aware what their property is worth, and sales agents are as well. And it's not going to be possible to get a deal across the line unless you're paying a decent amount of money that meets the needs of also the seller. But negotiation is really key here. However, if you keep missing out, at the moment in a lot of growth locations, prices are going up by $5,000, $10,000, even $15,000 per month. So every month you delay, if you keep doing these short offers that you keep missing out to a competitor, well, you're missing out on potential growth. So there comes a time when you're like, okay, I need to just make the decision and I'm going to offer a firm offer that's going to get this deal done. The next one is around setting yourself up for poor cash flow. And I'm guilty of this. Back in the day, I definitely took out a lot of money and bought a property, and I still wanted to live my lifestyle. And so I did sort of, I guess, restrict myself, and I was often having very small amounts of money in my bank, literally maybe a few weeks of savings that I could actually live off. I'd really recommend to really make sure you've got a little bit of a buffer and make sure that you're comfortable with it as well. And there are sacrifices that may have to be made from time to time. I certainly went without an overseas holiday for, I think it was 1 or 2 years, where I had to give up that luxury. But they talk about delayed gratification. It meant that when I could go overseas, the feeling of knowing I'm on holidays, I already own a property, this feels great. So delayed gratification can be a really good thing, and you might have to wind back your expenses a little bit just to make sure that your cash flow is all good. I've kind of talked about the data points already, and I think the biggest mistake that a lot of people make is this. So they're living in a city and they want to buy in the same city. And what they're going to do is they're going to buy a property in their city because they can afford it. And usually it's going to be an apartment because, as I said, most house prices in most cities, they're very unaffordable. And so they buy an apartment. But then you're going to be stuck. And I'm not against apartments. Let me just be really clear about that. But you have to be really, really strategic when buying apartments. because if there's a new tower opening up next door, your price is going to be stagnant. And we've seen this in lots of areas around the country where there's heaps of supply coming on and your apartment price in some cases can actually go down. So we need to make sure that if you're buying, don't just buy it because that's what you can afford. You need to look across the whole country. We've got like thousands of suburbs across the countries and many, many cities, right? And every city is in a different cycle. I recommend looking at a lot of the research reports and things like the property clock. There's also markets within markets. And what I mean by that is, even though we might say Sydney is really slow at the moment, there's definitely locations that are actually on the up and there's locations that are on the down. So we can't like paint a whole city with the same brush, but at least make sure you look at the data and look at across the country, not just in your backyard. Because sometimes if you buy in your backyard, like I did when I bought in Canberra, I knew Canberra because I was from there, it wasn't necessarily the best place to buy at the time. And our final mistake that I want you to avoid is actually buying with emotion. And I know it's your first home, and I know that this is a big thing for you, but there comes a point when it's not going to be the place where you live. And a lot of things don't really matter. There's the things that matter, then there's the things that don't matter. And if we make decisions based on our emotions, firstly, we may delay our decision because we're not going to find the perfect property. And guys, really, the perfect property it doesn't exist. There's always something with property, right? It's a physical asset. They're very complicated, and you're going to find that it's not going to always tick every box for you. And so when you're buying property, if you're buying with emotion, it means that firstly, you may keep missing out. You may never buy anything because you're spinning your wheels. And also it's going to be very stressful. But if you can sort of step away from that and then buy it based on the numbers, a lot of the clients that I've purchased for, they've bought across the country and they've still never actually seen their property. They're just looking at from a numbers perspective and they're just seeing the results. And sometimes not knowing the specific details of a property, out of sight, out of mind is what I'm saying. It can actually create less stress for you. And then if you look back on it in 5-10 years, you can see, oh, wow, this is how my property's progressed. I didn't have to stress about those little things, about like that little crack on the wall that annoyed me. And these are what I want you to avoid in 2025. Real quick though, are you wanting to know whether buying an investment property is right for you at this point in time? Well, I've got a really exciting quiz. It only takes 2 minutes. If you click the link that I've got below and pop your email address in, and we're going to send you the results of it. And this is going to work out whether you're financially, your mindset, and your knowledge is ready to take the leap into property investment, because these are 3 areas that you really want to get right before you take that dive. I'm also going to give you a cash flow forecast tool so you can see what the numbers look like with your investment property. And I'm also going to give you a guide about how to identify hotspot locations from a theoretical point of view and the data standpoint. So do that now, and I'm going to send you out your results and those little goodies as well. All right, so we've covered lots today. Firstly, we've talked about why Rentvesting is still relevant in 2025 and how a lot of smart and savvy investors are using it to get ahead. I've unpacked the playbook. I really just opened up the first page to talk about what the basics are, and there's way, way, way more to talk about. But I've given you a bit of an insight around how you can actually get started. And I've definitely talked about what I want you to avoid. And I hope you take these on board because, guys, I don't want you to make these mistakes. Hope today's been helpful. Please subscribe to the channel and follow if you're on Spotify. And if you are on Spotify, we're on YouTube as well. You can actually watch the vision of this podcast. Love to have you back again. We've got tons more coming up. Until next time, let's live our life and let's reinvest together. All information contained in this podcast is general in nature and does not consider your individual circumstances. You should consider the appropriateness of this information with regards to your individual objectives, financial situation, and needs, and speak to a professional.